All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're not just going through a report, we are cracking open a case file. What we have here is a deep security analysis that uncovers this incredibly structured, almost silent surveillance campaign against a single facility. So let's open up the file and see what our first clue is.
And this is the big question right at the heart of it. Were all these little suspicious events they were logging just, random noise? Or were they actually looking at the deliberate, coordinated moves of a very sophisticated adversary? The answer, as it turns out, was hiding in the data.
So, first things first, the investigators had to get a baseline. What does the day-to-day threat level even look like? And what they found was this constant, low-level pressure that just never, ever let up. Check this out. On a risk scale from 1 to 5, the average incident clocked in at 3.38. Now, this number isn't just an average of some high-risk days and some low-risk days. No. What this tells us is that the facility exists in this permanent state of heightened alert. This is its normal.
The report uses this fantastic analogy. They say the risk level barely even moves. The standard deviation was just 0.51, which is really just a fancy way of saying that number almost never changes. It's like the facility has a constant low-grade fever. The threat doesn't spike and then disappear. It's always there, just simmering. This is a truly persistent enemy.
Okay, so the threat is constant. That's our first big piece of the puzzle. The next logical question for the investigators was pretty obvious. Where is all this coming from? So they started hunting for patterns, for hotspots, for any place the adversary was focusing their energy.
A really common assumption in security is that threats follow a schedule. They peak at night, or maybe during shift changes. But the data here told a completely different story. When the analysts tried to connect the time of day with the risk level, they found, well, nothing. The clock was a total dead end.
And this slide, right here, this is the turning point in the case. Look at the left, time of day. That p-value of 0.73, in stats, that basically means it's random chance. But then look at the right, geographic location. The p-value is 0.001. A number that incredibly low means the connection is real. It is the statistical equivalent of shouting Eureka. Location wasn't just a clue, it was the clue.
So where were these hotspots? Well, this chart makes it crystal clear. The huge majority of high-risk incidents were all clustered around the vehicle gate. And a second, but still pretty significant, cluster was right along the sidewall compound. See? The adversary wasn't just poking around randomly, they were laser-focused. But here's where it gets even more clever. These spots weren't just hotspots, they were specialized work zones. The data showed that the action at the gates was mainly operational probing, testing security responses, looking for weak spots and how they let people in. At the same time, the sidewall was being used for asset reconnaissance, watching routines, mapping out the facility. This is a deliberate, thought-out geographic strategy.
Okay, now we are getting to what is, for my money, the most fascinating part of this entire analysis. The investigators started noticing that certain behaviors kept popping up in the logs, actions that just seemed off. So they decided to dig in, and what they found was basically a secret language, hidden in plain sight.
The analyst actually framed their findings around this idea, gestures as war. The theory goes that in this kind of operation, an enemy uses specific nonverbal cues, things like hand signals or just staring, not only to talk to their own team, but also to put psychological pressure on their target.
And here it is, the statistical smoking gun. When they ran the analysis, these very specific behaviors were incredibly connected. The factor loading for hand gestures was 0.98. I mean, that is almost a perfect 1.0. It means these aren't just random tics or nervous habits. They are a coordinated set of signals. This is intentional.
The report's conclusion on this is so chilling and direct. I'm just going to read the quote. These behaviors are not random. They represent a specialized behavioral dimension, psychological warfare. In other words, the adversary isn't just watching, they are performing. They're actively sending signals.
So just when you think you've got the picture figured out, the whole investigation takes this sharp, unexpected turn. The analysts decided to compare the risk profiles of those unknown people they were tracking outside the walls with another group, the people who are actually supposed to be there. So here are the two groups. On the left, you have the unknown security subjects. These are the folks doing all that suspicious signaling we just talked about. And on the right, contracted labor, just everyday workers like cleaning crews, maintenance guys. Logically, their risk profiles should be completely different, right?
Nope, wrong.
The statistical analysis came back with a shocking conclusion. There was no meaningful difference between the two groups. The contracted workers, the people with legitimate access, were generating the exact same level of risk as the obvious, unknown threats.
This chart just drives the point home. When you look at where the highest risk scores are coming from, we're talking a 4.0 or higher, you see the usual suspects. History sheet subjects, those are known threats, and other high-level security codes. And then right there, with the exact same slice of the pie, housekeeping. This points to a really, really concerning level of infiltration.
So let's connect all the dots. We've got a persistent, low-grade threat. We have specific geographic hotspots being used for specialized jobs. We have a secret language of gestures being used. And we have a threat coming from both inside and outside the wire. So what's the master plan here?
The final conclusion of the whole report is that this campaign isn't about setting up for a physical attack. The real goal is two things: information dominance, which is just knowing everything about the target's routines, and psychological destabilization, using that constant unnerving surveillance to just wear the target down.
So how in the world do you fight back against something like this? Well, the report lays out a really clear, data-driven strategy. First, harden those physical hotspots at the gates. Second, neutralize the mind games by training your staff to use indirect observation, so you deny the adversary the reaction they're looking for. And third, you have to confront the inside threat by vetting everyone with the same intense scrutiny.
Which leaves us with this final, really critical question. We just walked through a campaign where the weapons aren't bombs or bullets, but a fixed gaze and a hand signal. It's a pretty chilling reminder that in modern conflict, the battlefield can be purely psychological. So the question remains, when your opponent's main weapon is just a gesture, how do you really, truly fight back?